Today I want to tell a little bit about two books of interactive fiction that I read lately. One is called Trial of the Clone, and the other one, Trial of the Clone 2, Wraith of the Pacifist. So this is the first book and this is the sequel, not just because it comes afterwards, but it is a direct narrative sequel of events that are described here. Both are by Weinersmith. The first one was on Kickstarter. The second one, I don't remember if it was. I don't think so. Actually, the second one I found a little harder to find. This one I bought it on Amazon. This one I could not find. I had to contact Brett Pig, this website here. Through Brett Pig, I was able then to contact somebody who knew somebody who was able to sell me a copy. I don't know why this one is so hard to find. At least it was for me. This one was pretty successful on the Kickstarter. There's still a lot of copies floating around. Trial of the Clone. As you can see at first sight, most likely there is a franchise that comes to mind. It's not Lord of the Rings, it is not Star Trek, it is Star Wars. This book in particular feels a lot like a parody of Star Wars. That is definitely one of the main models, and it is used in the Star Wars subtext is used in a lot of interesting and humorous ways here. This one continues the same story, so it has a lot of common elements here, so it also has a Star Wars element, but this is a slightly different beast. It feels more like a satirical book than a parody book. This is more of a parody. This one is more of a satire of the intersection between economics, corporate interests, and politics in our modern society. So there's a line of continuity, but the flavor is slightly different. It's two different flavors of humor, and both books are in fact humorous and they're hilarious, especially this one, really one of those books that make you laugh out loud. At least that happened to me. Both humorous, and something interesting for interactive books, they are humorous and also they are proper game books, by which I mean you may have interactive fiction, branching fiction, you make decisions and you move along a narrative branch, so your decisions influence the way the story progresses and unfolds. And those that are humorous usually tend to be purely narrative. When the stories are just fun and you're there to enjoy the story and laugh about it, usually the authors don't want to distract you from the fun that you're having with something that you have to take seriously to be able to implement in game procedures, die rolls, selecting random numbers, keeping track of inventory, keeping track of resources, traits that you acquire, paths and careers, etc., etc. So this is actually an interesting and unusual solution, because usually game books with game procedures tend to be more on the serious side, and humorous stories that have an interactive quality tend to be on the purely narrative side. These ones have game procedures that you do need to take seriously. Of course, you can just ignore them. When you have a fight, you simply ignore that there's a fight. You say, oops, I won. How lucky was that? Nothing forces you. You can cheat, and actually one of the books even acknowledges that you can play fair. Also, you can cheat, which of course is nothing but acknowledging powers that the readers of interactive fiction always had. It's not that the author is bestowing those powers upon us. The author is simply acknowledging them. So, as for gameplay and structure, you have pages that have small numbers at the bottom in these little boxes here. So just like you had in some old books a la Fighting Fantasy, you do not need to have dice with you. Actually here, having dice is not only unnecessary but really undesirable, because the numbers do not go from 1 to 6 but from 0 to 3. So I guess you could do it with a D4. So there are several cases, for example, when you resolve combat, when you need to determine a random number, then you simply open the book at a random page and you look at the number, and the number that you ended up looking at, the number on the page that you randomly selected, is the number that was generated for that die roll or for that random selection. And again, there's a passage in the introduction that says, or just make sure that you dog-ear the pages where you want to go to in case you decide to cheat. And you have, in fact, a combat system where you need to generate a random number and add it to your combat skills. Sometimes you have battles of wits, which work in similar ways. You are, again, generating a random number, adding that to your wits, and then you're trying to meet a target number. You also have traits, so you can specialize. You have paths, like you have in so many fantasy stories where you can choose to be a cleric, a wizard, a fighter. You actually you start as a pretty shapeless, useless, or personality-less character. You're a clone. I'll explain later why you have been cloned to start with, where you exist to start with, but you do not have a specific profile and identity. So as the story progresses, you're given a choice of choosing one of 3 careers. You can be a medic, a fighter, or an engineer. I looked around to see how the careers work. My favorite one is the engineer, simply because it's the most fun one, because there's more humor involved. You know, the situations in which the book reminds you that you're incredibly smart and also phenomenally boring and nobody really likes you, which is a constant in the book. In the book, you are depicted from start to end as a loser, somebody who is incredibly stupid, is incredibly unable to make the smartest decision, let's put it that way. Nobody really likes you. You like to do puns that are very poor taste and no one laughs at them. It's the ideal character for a humorous novel. A humorous novel works better if the character, the protagonist, is somewhat incompetent and gets himself or herself in trouble. In this case, the fact that you are that supremely incompetent character, of course, also has a bit of self-irony, because you are accepting, as you read the book, that the author is basically insulting you, as you are controlling this incredibly inept character. But again, it works well. It is really amusing. Just to give you a sense of how incompetent your character is, and also to give a sense of how the prose works. The prose is very fresh, very natural. It gives you the sense of a conversation that the author is talking to you, also from time to time taking breaks to insult you or to make jokes at your expense. And there's a distinct freshness in the way that the style proceeds. But let me give you a sense of, well, what are you doing out there? The book starts with your birth, and of course you were born by artificial means because you're a clone. And you grow up in an orphanage. The idea is that actually a lot of clones were made back in the day when philanthropy and adopting children was fashionable. So actually the scientific industry built more of these children so they could be adopted. By the time you have been born, the fashion was out of fashion and people had moved on to other hobbies and other ways of achieving status symbols. So bad for you, you grew up alone in an orphanage because nobody wanted you anymore, you were not cool anymore. But it's explained also, it's not just that adopting clones wasn't cool, you in particular were not cool at all, nobody really liked you. Here's what the book says, page 1. Despite being the only child in the orphanage during your cutest years, you were passed over time and time again. Some cited your hair, others your physique, others your conversation. However, when exit surveys were filled out, by far the most common sentiment was simply, meh. Now that you are 16, you are legally unadoptable. Father Nadezhda fills out some forms, notes that you are now unadoptable for 2 reasons, and grimaces at your eyebrows. As you effectively covered them, he explains that da-da-da-da-da. And this idea that you're ashamed of your eyebrows is another common thread. Now, I'm not giving too many spoilers because I'm just reading passages from the very opening chapters, very opening passages. So now you're 16 and you are then adopted, or in any case you move on to a monastery. So you become a monk for this mystical association called the Silenus. You learn there that there is a mystical energy that surrounds and binds the universe, which can be harnessed to lift or to shoot lightning. You learn that there is a good side of the energy and an evil side. You are informed that the evil side is generally preferable since the learning process is much shorter and you gain all your power just by being upset or cowardly. Now, when you put it that way, the dark side of the energy seems pretty interesting indeed. The good side requires rigorous mental and physical discipline to achieve comparable results. And also, it is said that now the Silenus, this group of mystics that studied the energy, also they themselves are not very fashionable anymore. No one is really all that interested in them. I don't know that there was really a time when people were interested in the Force and Star Wars, but in the fiction of the story, now these guys are really not doing much. In fact, we are told, ever since the Silenus were utterly marginalized by improvements in technology, and you think about it, in fact, if you have good technology to lift up stuff, you don't necessarily need the Silene with the energy to lift up things. But since the Silenus were marginalized by improvements in technology, both good-siders and bad-siders spend most of the time watching movies and browsing the internet. And there's another passage, I believe, in this book when you're told that now they spend most of the time practicing keg stands and doing this other type of activities. That's the beginning of the story. It's pretty entertaining, it's pretty humorous, and it only gets better. What is interesting is that the story has a pretty good balance between the branching structure, so that allows you to explore different things and attempt different actions, and yet an overall overarching plot that develops in a pretty organized way. This is actually visible. You don't always get a chance of seeing the structure of a branching book visibly, but you do here thanks to these sections here that allow you to see the chapter in the book in which you are, I should say the act. The book is in 5 acts of different lengths, so you start here, and all the initial paragraphs you move freely, but you will always move in this area here, which is interesting and practical because it simply means that you do not have to jump from here, then the next page is here, then again here, then again here. You don't have to jump across the book to read the next chapter. After all, for good branching fiction in analog form to work, all you need is not to see the next chapter or the next section as you're reading the present one. So technically, if each section was just the following page, it would work perfectly, it would be maximally economic. This is a good compromise to keep the book logistically economic. It's easy to jump around within each section. And then, of course, there is a final scene that you can reach from different directions when something important happens that pushes the plot forward and then introduces you to the next act. That's why, again, in most of the story you have a lot of freedom, you can roam around, but also at the end you have the pleasure, the joy of seeing a fairly complex, well-developed plot taking shape throughout the story. There is a plot with a lot of twists and turns and surprises. This is why I'm not telling you anything more specific about what happens here, but because I wanted to have the joy of discovering. But I want to point out that the story is remarkable because it feels like it has structure and shape more than you have, say, in Choose Your Own Adventure books or even in fighting fantasy books. It has shape, structure, certain progression, which is really enjoyable, but at the same time it remains fully interactive with a lot of individual freedom left to the player or to the reader, or both. As for the whole story, as I said, you start as this clone without a passion, without a call. You choose a profession, you choose a training, and then you'll embark onto increasingly hilarious, ridiculous, zany adventures across the galaxy, from planet to planet, and it'll get enmeshed into, I can't tell you what I wish I could spoil it to you because it would be really fun. No, not really. I wish I could share with you. Okay, if you have read the books, then just PM me so we can talk about it and laugh about our favorite passages. But there really is a joy in discovering the plots behind these 2 books because they're pretty hilarious and they're pretty inventive. I mean, that's the thing. It's not just that every scene has a humorous invention, a humorous ideas, a crazy entertaining thing that happens. Is that the overall plot is actually pretty creative and inventing, and there is in fact pleasure in discovering where the story is going, what the final plot twists will be. And this is about between the 2, the one that I like best. This one I liked a little bit less, maybe because at this point the style is pretty similar, so the jokes are new, but the type of jokes I knew already wasn't like, wow, like the first time I'd seen this, so this book made more of an impact on me stylistically. This one stylistically was a little less innovative, but I like the style. And the plot also was interesting, but again, there were certain things in there that I had seen before. It felt like they had been done here. It's still original enough, it's still different enough. The satirical element is new. At least there are some satirical elements in Title of the Clone, but here the political references, the reference to corporate industry, to lobbying, they're pretty accurate, pretty obvious, but still, it's still fun to see them. And they're not, that kind of satire doesn't have that big of a role here. Here's when there is satire, so laughing about social things rather than cultural elements such as Star Wars. When there's satire here is mainly about media and media culture these days, with reality shows, with our obsession for appearing, for having our image reproduced and set out there. This is an obsession that we have, of course, with public appearance. Wrath of the Pacifist, enjoyable, but to me not nearly as fun and as interesting. There is something that I like. There is a certain part where the book, even though the series starts as a Star Wars thing, the book does remind me quite strongly of an episode of the old Star Trek, an episode that I'm quite fond of, and I cannot tell you which one that is, otherwise I'd be spoiling a lot. I was like, oh, that's so fun, I feel like I'm playing the role of that character in that episode, doing that thing. Oh, that is so fun. I know, spoiler-free reviews are tough to film. In any case, Weinersmith has given us two entertaining books. One excellent, one very good in my opinion. Trial of the Clone, Wrath of the Pacifist. Both enjoyable, both modern game books, both humorous branching text that definitely can be enjoyed by anybody who is nostalgic of the good old game books of yesteryear, or simply in general, for they're enjoyable by anybody who wants to read a good, fun, interactive story, because they're humorous, and even if you're not a big fan of interactive books or game books, I think you can still have quite a good time reading these two books. Trial of the Clone, Wrath of the Pacifist, Weinersmith.